Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's IOP Speaker Series event, The Future of the Democratic Party. My name is Katie Hacker, and I am a second year in the college from New York City studying public policy and human rights. At the IOP, I am a House intern on the Speaker Series team and a member of UC Dems. As someone deeply engaged in the recent presidential election as a volunteer with Swing Left, I had the opportunity to speak with decisive voters across the country. In these conversations, both Democratic and Republican voters voiced frustrations with the Democratic Party's murky messaging and its priorities, sparking important debates about where the party fell short. These discussions highlighted the challenges Democrats face, not just in winning elections, but in connecting with the broader electorate. Whether exploring these issues through my studies or in conversations beyond the classroom, I am eager to hear tonight's discussion on what strategies have worked, where the party goes from here, and how Democrats can rebuild momentum. Tonight, we have an incredible panel to help us unpack these strategies and what they mean for the future of the Democratic Party. Pete Buttigieg served as U.S. Secretary of Transportation from 2021 to 2025, where he worked to launch over 60,000 infrastructure projects. Before joining the Biden administration, Pete served as the mayor of South Bend, Indiana, and an officer in the U.S. Navy Reserve. In 2020, he ran for the Democratic presidential nomination, making history by winning the Iowa caucuses and securing a strong second-place finish in the New Hampshire primary. Pete is also an IOP Pritzker Fellow this winter and spring. Congresswoman Marie Gluesenkamp Perez is the U.S. Representative for Washington's 3rd Congressional District. In Congress, Congresswoman Gluesenkamp Perez is recognized for her bipartisan approach and commitment to representing working-class constituents, primarily focusing on supporting small businesses, veterans affairs, and infrastructure development. She also co-chairs the Blue Dog Coalition, advocating for fiscal responsibility and pragmatic policies. Justin Bibb currently serves as the mayor of Cleveland, Ohio. Since taking office, Mayor Bibb has spearheaded several initiatives aimed at modernizing Cleveland's infrastructure, enhancing public safety, and promoting social equity. He was also recently appointed president of the Democratic Mayors Association, quickly emerging as a leader in the party. Moderating tonight's conversation is David Axelrod. David is a renowned American political strategist and former senior advisor to President Barack Obama. He is also the founding director of the University of Chicago's Institute of Politics, a senior commentator for CNN, and host of the Axe Files podcast. Some quick housekeeping before we begin. First, please make sure to turn off and silence your cell phones. Second, when it's time for Q&A, a microphone will be placed in the audience, and as usual, priority for first questions will go to students. Finally, please make sure to check upcoming IOP events, including That's What She Said, featuring former speechwriters to President and Michelle Obama, and former speakers of the House Nancy Pelosi and Paul Ryan. That will be this Thursday, February 20th at 5:30 in Ida Noyes Hall. And David Hogg, American Activism in the Balance, which will take place on Monday, February 24th at noon in Ida Noyes as well. For students interested in continuing tonight's conversation, there will be a spin room led by our Student Advisory Board at the Institute of Politics at 7 p.m. following tonight's program. Make sure to check out politics.uchicago.edu for more. Now, please join me in welcoming Pete Buttigieg, Congresswoman Marie Gluesenkamp Perez, Mayor Justin Bibb, and David Axelrod.
What a crowd at 0-degree wind chill, which I should say, I'm happy to be home here. I'm spending some time elsewhere, and I came back, and I know I'm in Chicago when it's 0-degree wind chill. But it is a measure of the urgency of the moment that this room is filled on a night like this. And I can't think of a better group to be with of young leaders of different experiences and backgrounds. Hilariously, Pete Buttigieg is the old man here. But That's what happens. Time moves on, my friend. But when parties lose elections, there's always this period of grief and soul searching and hand wringing and finger pointing, and Democrats are very good at that. But I just want to start off by asking, what lessons, not as a political matter, but what message was being sent in this last election that should be the source of deeper contemplation as you think about strategy moving forward. And Marie, I want to start with you because you come from a rural district in the state of Washington. Donald Trump carried your district both elections in which that you won and the one before it. I think there may have been the biggest delta between your winning margin and his and Harris in all of those races. Tell me, because we've had long discussions about this, tell me what you take away from all of this and what can you impart to others as they contemplate where the party should be going.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I represent a triple Trump district, so he's carried it 3 times now. But in this last election, I outperformed him and Harris. And so I do think I am representing my district. This is my family, my team, like my community. And I think one of the things that's frustrating to me is you get the answer to the question that you ask. And people have been asking the wrong question repeatedly. They ask the question that delivers the kinds of answers they want to hear, that doesn't indict them in any way, or their responsibility or agency in a system. It's like people talk about it like, oh, this was about, people want, it's cost of living, it's about cheaper stuff. And I'm like, I don't think this, my family, my community, we don't want cheap crap. That's not the point of this. We want what is worth having. We want to be able to work one job. We want to be able to own land. We want a level playing field for small businesses. And a lot of the narrative and the discussion about democracy, it misses the it's almost disempowering to people to say our entire world is based on one vote. No, democracy persists in all of these small and all of these personal, microscopic things. It is how well you know your neighbors. It is who comes to your house. It's who's teaching shop class. Those are all of the things that build a strong nation. And a lot of times it feels like the national agenda is so, it's just this industrial complex of, consultants that want to sell the same TV ad in Ohio as Washington State.
Not that that's a bad thing.
Maybe not bad, but I guess effective.
No, it can be a bad thing. Trust me.
How effective it is, because it feels like a lot of discussion is never talking to us or even about us. It's telling us that there's a problem that's wrong and that we need their help to fix it. No, maybe we know shit you don't know. Maybe there are things that are worth knowing that you can't learn in a textbook. Maybe there's other ways of being in the world that aren't predicated on having a cheap stream of imported crap. And all this narrative about American consumers. Who asked you to defend our identity around consumption? What about American producers? What about making stuff that lasts? What about having something that's worth having? And so coming out of this election, I've been thinking about, kind of what can I get? What can we get? What do we want? And what is actually worth having? Because those are not the same things. And thinking about it at a bigger level, not in a reflective resistance, but in a positive agenda of what are you going to do? What are you going to do? What are you doing? And who are you fighting for? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Is that getting at what you're thinking about?
It is, and we'll talk more about it. Justin, you're the mayor of Cleveland.
Mm-hmm. Go Cass.
You had a low turnout.
Yeah.
11% lower than the election before. And there has been a drift among particularly younger black men. And talk to me about that. And what were your voters saying by not voting?
Yeah.
And some of them by there's the assumption that black voters will reflexively vote for Democratic candidates, and certainly not for Donald Trump. So tell me what you took away from that election.
Well, as the Congresswoman said, the Democratic Party not only has a problem of us not asking the right questions, but we have a listening problem as a party. And I remember it was 2 weeks before the election. I was in a barbershop in the southeast side of Cleveland in the Lee Harvard neighborhood. And I was talking to a group of barbers and their customers, and I asked them to raise their hand if they were voting for Donald Trump. And a majority of them raised their hand and said they were voting for Donald Trump. And the biggest reason why was the fact that they all got a stimulus check from the president during the pandemic because he signed it. That was the only thing they remembered from the Donald Trump presidency. So they asked me, well, they call me Bibbs in the hood, by the way, not Mayor Bibb, but Bibbs. Well, Bibbs, why should we vote for Vice President Harris? She had 3 years to do all this stuff. Now she wants our vote. And I said, well, you see that road outside of your barbershop that just got resurfaced? It's because we had a president and President Biden and Vice President Harris who helped deliver the bipartisan infrastructure law.
What about Transportation Secretary Buttigieg?
That's Secretary Buttigieg. Heavily. I was getting there, David. I was getting there.
He was fidgety over there.
You see the fact that we've reduced violent crime and homicides in our city by 25%. It's because we had an administration in the White House who invested in violence prevention initiatives in Cleveland. Those are the receipts. So we were able to connect the dots in terms of the policy wins and how it impacted the lived experiences.
So let me ask you a question about that. Do you think that people in Cleveland feel safer? Do they feel like crime has been reduced there? Because, and I know Marie, you've spoken about this, it's hard to jawbone people into feeling what they don't feel. You can say the economy is a lot better, and there are a lot of indices that would suggest that the economy improved greatly under Joe Biden, but everything cost 20% more, and that's what people were focused on. So if you tell them the economy is great, they're like, what are you talking about? Mm-hmm. So I'm wondering, when you say, indisputably, and I think crime across the country has dropped at various, do people feel safer in Cleveland than they did a few years ago?
I would say people feel safer, but they're not satisfied. And that's why, as elected officials, we can't get caught up in just the data points of the policy wins, but we also need to do a better job of tackling the perception. And so instead of just talking about how we reduce homicides, we are in neighborhoods doing community walks with public safety, with clergy, with activists, connecting the work to what's happening on the ground.
Pete, you have had the experience of working at the local level and at the national level. How do you connect the two? I mean, there must be some frustration on your part when you hear about the road outside that nobody connects with the work that you've done. But more deeply, what message did you take away from this election? What have you been thinking about since?
Well, I think there's rightly a lot of examination, as there always is in this season, about what we have to say and how we say it. And I think both of those things should be examined. And I have a lot of thoughts on that. But to me, the thing we're not talking about enough, while we talk about what we have to say and how we have to say it, is where we say it. I think that's become a huge gap in the way that our party has approached politics. And one way to illustrate it is, I think something folks have been saying that I think tries to get at this problem, but also completely demonstrates an inability to see what's in front of us. And that's this idea that, well, if only we had a Rogan of the left, That's what we need. We need a Joe Rogan, but for the left. And if we had that, that's the kind of thing that we'd be reaching some of the people we're not reaching. Problem is, people aren't listening to Rogan because they view it as being of the right. They don't think of it as political at all. Mm-hmm. They're not looking for politics. They're looking for what protein powder to use and an interesting podcast, and the politics finds them. And some seasons it's Bernie, and some seasons it's Trump. That's why it's worth listening to people who are not consuming political television. So I'm known for going on Fox, and I believe that's a smart thing for Democrats to do, and I wish more Democrats would do it. But what I'm really worried about are the people who are not watching CNN or Fox, and who are...
I'm worried about that too.
A lot of folks aren't looking for political content, but it's finding them. And it's finding them wrapped up in a lot of cultural stuff. You could be on parenting Instagram and you're getting this trad wife stuff with a little politics inflected into it, or Rogan or the rest of it. And I think we really need to be much smarter about taking this conversation to places where it's not reaching folks, because otherwise I do think we run the risk of doing what anybody who's been in any committed relationship or marriage knows you shouldn't be doing. I mean, if your spouse or partner comes to you upset with you, and you proceed to say, you're wrong to be upset. Here's why you're wrong to be upset. You should be much happier than you are.
Yeah.
You know what's going to happen next, right?
I've run the experiment.
Yeah.
It's not good. It's not good. Marie, you know, one of the things when we last talked that you spoke about was why you decided to run for Congress at a time when it seemed like a hopeless task for a Democratic candidate to run for Congress. And you talked about the people who would come to your district looking for votes. And it's related to what you were saying earlier, but I mean, what Pete's talking about is sort of the pipelines through which we convey the message. But you have a slightly different cut on this because, and you said it earlier, you said people come and tell us what they need, but they don't spend a lot of time to find out from us what we really think we need.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And I think kind of the original sin in politics is condescension. You know, it's saying, I know, you know, first of all, you know, you say, hey, I've got to, you know, hey, if you're nice to me and you check all the right boxes, maybe you can apply and maybe I'll give you help. You know, like, I don't want to apply for your stupid grant that I won't get. I want to have a strong regional economy. I don't want to get retrained into serving cocktails on a golf course. I want to be able to harvest timber in the woods that my family's been doing for generations and be a steward and have a relationship with the woods. And you know, to Pete's point, like when I used to pull cars into the shop, like it was like 8 out of 10 times.
You and your husband have an auto repair shop.
Yeah, we're an independent shop, so like it's us. We're not dealer affiliated, and that's very rare for people my age and generally, you know, newer businesses to be independent now. But you know, 8 out of 10 times it would be news on the radio when I'd turn the car on, and that's gone. Like people they're just tired of being told what's wrong with them and what's wrong with their neighbors, and just getting whipped into a froth. You know, and now it's it's a lot more of the non-political identity, like listening to, you know, podcasts on you know, lawnmower racing or, you know, whatever it is, and it's like finding ways that are non-political to communicate your value system and your interest, and I think that's one of the things that was successful in my race. Was like one of the reasons I ran, and in addition to being really tired of, you know, the media my neighbors consume telling them that all Democrats are evil and, you know, we're terrible people, was right to repair. I really care about right to repair legislation. I want, you know, I saw in
Explain it.
Yeah, so John Deere's tractor is kind of the genesis of this. They started putting in their terms of service contracts saying that once you buy their tractor, you can only get it serviced by one of their authorized dealers. And that means that at haying season, all these tractors blitzed out, 1 year make and model, all blitzed out, and nobody could cut their hay. And, you know, farmers have a suicide rate 3.5 times higher than the general population. one of the highest things they cite is their debt leverage. Imagine having a $600,000 piece of yard art, and you can't open it up to fix, to flip a switch without voiding the whole warranty. So, people lost their hay, they lost their feed for their cattle, price of beef goes, all these ancillary things come out of that, right? And what we're saying with Right to Repair is that we have the right to fix our own shit. We're not just consumers, we are stewards. We don't want this black box that we have no agency in. We want to have things that last. We want to have agency in determining how we maintain them, and that's real environmentalism. Making things last. Having a relationship to your stuff in the natural world around you, not just of consumption, but of stewardship. So, I ran on Right to Repair, and these are things that are non-political, non-partisan.
Have you passed that bill?
I'm about to reintroduce it, but we have more bipartisan co-sponsors than we've ever had. And my thing is, you say you care about lowering prices and respecting the trades. We're tired of lip service. Do something. Pass the damn bill. Give us teeth to be stewards and to have domestic manufacturing, to have local food systems, to be able to have family farms again. I don't think driving a Tesla is the emblem of environmentalism. I think driving your Toyota Corolla with
Especially
500K on it, that's real environmentalism. And you can make a clutch last, for 400,000 miles. That's it. I have immense respect and admiration for that kind of environmentalism. So talking about things that are kind of apolitical, but deeply cultural, deep signifiers of who we are and how we view ourselves. I think that is core to how we navigate a deeply toxic partisan environment.
Justin, one of the things that was noteworthy about this last election is that the only group with whom Harris improved on Biden's performance in 2020 were white college-educated voters, which is about a third of the electorate. The decline among other groups was noticeable and in some cases pretty precipitous. Hispanic voters down 8.6, Asian voters 11.4, and black voters 1.5. We discussed that earlier. And now I'm going to betray my own bias here, but I do feel, and part of it has been formed by conversations with people like Marie, that the Democratic Party sometimes, with all good intentions, approaches non-college voters, rural voters, like missionaries and anthropologists. Come and say, we're here to help you become more like us.
Yeah.
And with that is this message that carries kind of disrespect and disdain, even if it's not intended, but also a lack of understanding of what really is important to people in those communities. How do we repair that? How does the Democratic Party become, you can't be the party of the working class and disdain it at the same time.
Yeah, I think our party, in many ways, we have over-intellectualized our values where we've forgotten how to have a very focused, singular message on what we stand for as a party. When I ran for mayor 4 years ago, it was my first time running for public office. I left my job in the private sector. I was disgusted at my city's response to the COVID-19 pandemic. I was disgusted at seeing the tragic murder of George Floyd on our TV screens and thought that it was time for a new generation of leaders, especially in the Democratic Party, at the local level to show our values, whether it be being aggressive on public safety, but also being thoughtful about police accountability, whether it be we can be pro-equity, but also pro-business and pro-growth in terms of economic development. And as a party, we need to embrace diversity, equity, and inclusion and not run away from it. And these are the fights that made me want to be a Democrat when I got involved in politics, working on my first campaign, trying to get John Kerry elected in 2004. And until we get back to the basics, and until we do a better job of meeting our voters where they are, we're never going to be successful. And one of the things that frustrates me the most, especially as a black voter, is the fact that before I was in office, we'd only see candidates running for office in my community a week before the election, right? If we want to win back the House, win back the Senate, and win back the White House, we need to have a permanent organizing campaign every year. There is no such thing as an off-year election. Every damn election matters now more than ever. That's how we do a better job of doing it, in my opinion.
Might help in governing, too.
Yes, absolutely.
Pete, you know, when you talk about the disaffection of the working class, and it used to be the people who were the white working classes, but it's not just the white working class. As I said, I think earlier, 55% of Hispanic men voted for Trump. You know, it's a broader, it's a class thing. And you think about the history of the last 40 years, globalization, automation, a war that 1% of the population fought, everyone paid for, but 1% of the population fought, disproportionately from small towns and rural areas. You served, so you know that. A financial crisis that gutted the middle of the country and the middle class, and then a pandemic that did much of the same. And Democrats have some complicity in that. Isn't there a deeper reason for the disaffection of voters from a party that is supportive of institutions, about the failure of institutions?
Yeah, I mean, look, if you're my age or younger, as apparently everybody up here now is,
I'm here for you.
you've been through a lot of policy failure over the years. I mean, basically from when I hit voting age in the year 2000, we were subjected to the Iraq War, the financial crisis. Then we had what I would consider to be a big policy win that made a difference for our generation in the Affordable Care Act. But then everything that happened to our society with the arrival a decade ago, by the way, that's something that I stopped and did the mental math and surprised me a decade ago, the arrival of Trumpism, and everything that followed, and what I consider to be some really good policy work in the last few years. But it's put us in a place where right now, a lot of people are still just sour. By the way, this is everywhere. Japan, Canada, people are sour for a lot of reasons that we need to take seriously. I think the challenge for a party that cares about institutions is to make clear our message, especially now when people can't tell if we have a proactive message or just an opposition message. We do have a proactive message, and it's about making sure government works for people and serves us well and enhances our freedom. But that's not the same thing as being content with the status quo. There are things about the status quo in transportation policy that drove me nuts the entire 4 years that I was transportation secretary. And there are many of those things we were able to change. There are many more of those things we weren't able to change. And what we've got to do now is make clear that we too demand and expect government to work differently and better than it has. But that burning it to the ground isn't going to do that for anybody. And whether we're talking about the areas that I specifically just worked in or more generally, what I see them doing, randomly firing people who oversee our nuclear weapons by mistake, and then bringing up and unfiring them, like that is not what we mean when we say that certain parts of government may very well need to be taken apart and put back together, which I think is a legitimate feeling and frustration that I felt as a mayor when I was looking at Washington, and sometimes felt even more strongly when I was in Washington trying to make it work for places like the city that I grew up in.
Isn't that, in some ways, Marie, the trap that Democrats are in right now in reacting to Trump? Because the impulse, and we saw many of your colleagues, I believe strongly that USAID is important. I mean, I think that, the things they've done not only were important from a humanitarian standpoint, but from a national security standpoint. But I suspect that if you ask people in your district kind of to prioritize things, that foreign aid would fall right to the bottom of the list because it doesn't touch their lives, at least not in the way it's presented. And the first thing that your colleagues did, they were out there in front of the USAID building, and that was the first sort of visible action on the part of Congress. And I suspect that there are people in your district who say, well, that's what I'd expect. That's what I'd expect. They're not racing to the ramparts, but something that is essential to my life. And so the question is, how do Democrats respond to Trump in a way that doesn't seem to be standing up for the status quo, as Pete says, but standing up for people?
Yeah, a county in one of my counties just went down to a 4-day school week because of budget shortfalls. And the school that my son would go to, he's too young right now, but he would go to, they're talking about doing the same thing. We don't have air conditioning in our schools. And so if, when they see that, USAID is spending $3 million or whatever on putting together a comic book, that feels pretty unrelated to our experience and to what we've been asking for. And it's funny, somebody just spray painted one of my office door traitor last night. And I'm like, traitor to who? Traitor to what? Like, is that fixing shit? Coming out and spray painting an office building? Because I'm fighting for SRS. I'm fighting to get our schools funded. I'm fighting, wildfire was one of the largest emitters of CO2 in my district, and we're not harvesting the timber in my state, and we're not harvesting the timber that would prevent that kind of catastrophic wildfire and fund our schools and give us like the dignity of honest work. And to see people come out and protest and get locked out of buildings doesn't feel like it's you're not talking about what we asked you to talk about here. And I think it's really important that we are focused on our communities and what our communities need. And I think at a national level, like maybe even global, it's like we have moved away from a system of representative government where there's accountability and like a place-based politics, and moving further and further towards hegemony, where power exists nowhere and everywhere, and in whoever claims it the loudest, as opposed to me showing up and fighting desperately for my woods, for my schools, for my businesses. And without that local focus, without a fierce loyalty to place, representative government fails, and it becomes captured by these very abstract ideas of like environmentalism writ large, as opposed to local loyalty to our woods and our rivers and the place where I want to get buried. Like when we turn environmentalism into a commodity that you can buy at Target, you lose the whole thing. Like that is like a flaccid argument in the face of what is an urgent necessity. And kind of going back to a little bit about what Justin was talking about, so I run a small, we're a small business. We don't have an HR department. We don't have a legal team. The volume of bureaucratic bullshit we have to navigate to run a small business in this country. And then you tell me that like they've achieved some kind of equity by translating lawyer gobbledygook into 8 languages. Well, if you still have to hire a lawyer to run a small business in this country, that's not it. Like, you've missed the point. And you've boxed a lot of people out of like the dignity of independence.
So talk to me about why, what is about the Democratic Party that drew you to the Democratic Party?
Well, I believe in a level playing field. I believe in good public schools. I believe in building things that last. I believe in respecting my neighbors. I believe in personal liberty. A lot of things. And I think spending more time talking about the things that we hold dear and not just responding to whatever clickbait shit shows up in your feed, that's a trap. That's a trap to walk into whatever little diorama they've set up for us and then asked us to go, we're not fighting hard enough if we don't become props in a narrative we didn't orchestrate or define.
Justin, the immigration issue is obviously a bright, shiny object here in the first weeks of the Trump administration. But it obviously was a big concern as well of Americans, and not just limited to the base of the Trump movement or the Republican Party. How do you, as a mayor, now deal with the challenge that you face? Well, I'll leave it there. I may have a follow-up on
Yeah. It certainly has been a chaotic 4 weeks since Trump took office for the second time. And I was a mayor during the first Trump presidency, but I've had a lot of late nights. And just several weeks ago, I got overwhelmed with calls from small business owners where the restaurants were raided, and none of them had committed a violent crime, and they all had their documentation. But they were still detained. We just opened up a brand new restaurant place-based development in our city called Central Via, and they had to shut down for almost a week because of fear of raids. And I convened a group of community leaders at City Hall. It was jam-packed, all talking about our response to calm the fears and anxiety in our city. And guess what happened? After I did a statement talking about the fact that we're going to continue to be a city that welcomes immigrants and protect those that may be undocumented in our city, my new senator said, if I don't follow Trump's orders, he's going to cut my federal funding. Cleveland is a city that was built on immigrants. And I don't care what my senator says, but I have to make sure that we are always on the right side of history, because that's what the job requires. And as a mayor, I don't have the luxury of playing political games. If there is fear and anxiety of folks living in our city, they're scared to go to school, scared to go to a hospital, scared to go to church. That's not the American way.
I'm the son of an immigrant, so I feel strongly about immigration. But I think if you ask most Americans, this was clearly something that impacted on the last election. There also was a feeling that immigrants should come here legally. Mm-hmm. That the border situation was out of control. And so how do you, I saw a comment of yours saying if there are people here who have committed crimes,
absolutely, they
should go. But how do you balance that feeling that people have? And I know, Marie, you've been in the middle of this debate because you've supported legislation that some of the party did not want to support, including just recently relative to immigration. But is there not a common sense kind of position here?
Yeah, there absolutely is. I think as a party and as a country, we should be able to walk and chew gum at the same time and not get distracted by the theater politics in this conversation. We need this Congress and our president to work on fixing our broken immigration system, finally passing common sense immigration reform, and we can secure the border as well too. But for those that are here that are undocumented, we need to have a common sense pathway to citizenship.
Well, that would be part of a comprehensive
part of it, absolutely.
Commercial, but it doesn't have to start with the concept of real borders and enforceable borders?
Yes, absolutely.
Pete, I want to go back to what I was talking to you before because I didn't kind of finish the thought, which is when you look at the economic arc of the last 40 years, and you've had a tremendous polarity between people who have done very well, including people in this room, and people who are pedaling faster and faster to get along. And it seems like some of the things are systemic, and that you need bigger ideas to say, here's how we're going to create a sense of fairness for people who are out there running auto repair shops. And some of it may be looking at those regulations and saying, what are we doing? What do we really need? Some of it has to do with, how we tax. Some of it has to, and this particularly affects young people who now have less good prospects than their parents, which is a kind of new in our experience. Don't we owe sort of really, we talk about authenticity in politics. How about authenticity in policy making?
Well, yeah, I mean, part of our approach to that was, at risk of sounding overly straightforward, building stuff to help people's lives get better. I mean, we I think, overcomplicated in our rhetoric some of the economic struggles that ultimately came down to things like people in the trades not having enough good-paying job opportunities, and a chance to change that through making sure that we enlisted them to build a new generation of American infrastructure. Now, the 40 years of economic patterns won't be reversed in 4 years, as we found out. You certainly don't get credit for it in 4 years or less. But when I think about some of the work we were able to set into motion to build, not just to build bridges, but to build people up. In fact, one of the best days of my whole time as secretary was when I visited Marie in her district. And she made a point of ensuring that we spent most of our time, after a very cold walk on the I-5 bridge, which we were ultimately able to fund the replacement of, spent most of our time engaging with people in apprenticeship programs and pre-apprenticeship programs who you could watch standing up taller because they saw that they were not being treated as a problem to be solved, but being called into this national project of building up our infrastructure, including replacing that bridge, which had this, remember going up in the wheelhouse, there's this cable system to pull the bridge up when a boat comes down the river, and there were dead pigeons in the gearworks and buckets of grease that they were using to...
it's like 30K of grease a year.
Is that what it comes to?
Yeah.
So obviously not the most efficient. Turns out no moving parts bridge is the right answer for the future. And we were able to get that funded, right? But the pace that these things happen on means that that's not a bridge you can drive across today. And I'm worried that it just got slowed down more by the actions of the Trump administration, which on the moment they took office acted to freeze the funding for projects from the interstate bridge replacement that affects Marie's district to, I've lost count of how many projects we're doing in Cleveland, and just say, this money can't move. Now, that got defeated, and it is one of the first important cases of Trump surrendering on something after the legal challenges. But that's an example of what we're up against in order to keep some of that economic momentum going.
Yeah. And Marie, do you think that the acknowledging that the infrastructure law was a monumental thing, if you were appointed to think through policy, what are the policies that are closest to the people you represent, and maybe to the people that you represent, Justin, that would actually change the nature of their lives for the better? You know, I think of the cost of and the availability of daycare, for example. You mentioned the schools. You know, how do you devise a vision, not just to stop Trump from doing what he's doing, but that actually authentically speaks to the needs of the people who you represent? And broadly, I think there are things that travel that, you know, daycare is a problem for every young family, or most young families. Schools are obviously a problem for a lot of families in this country. But talk to me about that. I'm giving you 2 minutes to devise a platform that will authentically speak to people across this country who may feel like they're not being heard.
Yeah, I mean, it starts with respect. You know, you respect people, and you respect that they want to do a good job, and you get out of their way in a lot of cases. You know, it's a rebalancing of sort of clipboards to work boots, and saying, like, I used to work in a bike shop, and it was on a college campus, and I will never forget teaching a physics major how to use a wrench. You know, when you divorce theory from practice, that is how you end up with the Cybertruck. you know, this like specialization is not the key here. That's not the solution. It's a symptom of a problem. Having a community with place-based local economies that work. One of the bills I've got is it's known as the banana bill. It says that it creates a positive right to serve fresh fruits. Somebody at a daycare in my district told me they were not legally allowed to peel a banana in their daycare. Their licensor told them they would need like 10 more sinks before they could legally peel a banana. They can open a bag of chips, but they can't peel a banana. That's crazy. Think about national health. Think about the impact on the cost of childcare. So actually respecting people, and Jen Palka's talked about it in a really interesting way. It's not about deregulation, it's about deproceduralization. You are asking people to do the wrong job because you don't have confidence in their intelligence or their care. You do not legislate care or diligence. You know, you trust and you build more reflective legislative cycles that come back and say, how was this implemented? You know, allowing people to build their own homes. More homeownership, access to capital, a level playing field for small businesses, where you have guidelines in place like right to repair. So you can get your stuff fixed where you want to get it, or you can do it yourself. You can get something that lasts. Like that level of accountability. Not coming in and telling someone that, hey, there's something wrong with you that I'm going to fix, but like listening closely to saying, why is it that you're not able to, make payroll? You know, how can we build more wealth in the middle class? People's budgets are fungible. Cash is fungible. You don't fix the cost of daycare just by subsidizing daycare. You can also do it by saying, well, now you can own a home, so you have more room in your budget to pay for high quality care. There's a lot of ways to address these problems, and it's going to take a lot more confidence in the American people and businesses and folks that are there to do the work. So, it is like maybe deproceduralization, I'd say, would be a big part of this work.
Justin, first of all, we want you to line up. Where are the microphones? On either side, in the aisles there, right? In the second aisles. Those who have questions, please line up. I want to ask you a last question. I'd like you all to respond to it. You know, you mentioned DEI. It's become obviously a rallying cry and an organizing principle for the Trump administration, the disassembling of DEI programs. But clearly there was a big cultural element to this last election, and the message was the values of Democrats are not your values, that they're not really focused on you. They're not focused on, and it's more than, that's more than a racial thing, because like we said, 55% of Hispanic men, almost a majority of Hispanic voters voted for Trump. Is this not a problem?
It's a big problem. And I think it's a problem especially for men and white men, both educated and non-educated, college degree white men. And we as a party, we have to do a better job of meeting people where they are and embracing the lived experience of people. And unfortunately, I think we've gotten too soft as a party. The fact that President Trump was the first president in history to go to the Super Bowl or show up to a UFC fight. Democrats, it's okay to be cool and go to cultural events. And you might get booed, but that's the game. That's what you sign up for. And we as mayors, this is the life we live every single day. And I think that's why, as head of the Democratic Mayors Association, it's so important that mayors play a large role in the rebuild and the remake of the Democratic Party.
Marie, you looking like you want me to bypass you on this question, but it seems that this is very large in the challenge that Democrats face, and we watched what I considered a spectacle of the Democratic National Committee chair election, in which it seemed to devolve into.
I was there.
Into sort of like we need a left-handed Mongolian caucus and a right-handed this caucus, and what we did was fine. We just have to communicate it better.
What a load of shit.
I set you up there.
Yeah, that was pretty disappointing to watch. Say there's no problem except for a messaging problem. Like, we're smarter than that. The American population is smarter than that to say, well, if you just said it a different way, I would think you were right. No, like, you're saying you're not listening. There's a lack of humility. There's a lack of service. There's a lack of candor. And so, that was disappointing to watch. I think, showing up is so important. And it's also, I think changing who is considered qualified and capable of holding office. Like, I was given a 2% chance of winning this seat. Like, I was laughed out of consultant's office, so when I was talking about running. So, I think.
That might have been to your advantage.
Yeah. Well, and I think, looking at a lot of the Blue Dog seats, like where we're holding strong, where votes that we were attacked over, turns out people really didn't like the formulation of Biden's student debt forgiveness. Only 3% of my community, my district, held federally issued student loans. So don't tell me that you're doing me a favor, and that if you message it differently, that I would see that it was really a great deal for me, and I'm just stupid. Listen to us. Get us a program that works. Get shop class back in junior high. Create real avenues for having a small business in the trades. Get us 529, college savings reform.
Speak to this. You've got an interesting perspective. You're probably the most successful candidate, out gay candidate in American history. You're on the cusp of all of this. But talk about that and the sort of absorption with these issues to the point of allowing at least people to caricature the Democratic Party in that way.
Yeah, I saw a little bit of that event you described, and it was a caricature of everything that is wrong with our ability both to cohere as a party and to reach to those who don't always agree with us. And we cannot go on like that. We cannot. I also think that we believe in the values that we care about for a reason. And this is not about abandoning those values. It's about making sure we're in touch with the first principles that animate them. What do we mean when we talk about diversity? Is it caring for people's different experiences and making sure no one's mistreated because of them, which I will always fight for? Or is it making people sit through a training that looks like something out of Portlandia, which I have also experienced, and it is how Trump Republicans are made. If that comes to your workplace with the best of intentions, but doesn't actually get at what actually matters here, what's actually at stake. I think, and this might sound counterintuitive, if we were more serious about the actual values and not caught up in vocabularies and trying to cater to everybody only in terms of their particular slice of combinations of identities versus the shared project. I actually think if we thought about it a little bit differently, things like diversity would be actually an example of how we reach out beyond our traditional coalition. And what I mean by that is the opposite of diversity is uniformity. And if there's one thing I really respect about principled conservatives, even if I don't always agree with them, it's that they have a horror of anything that has a whiff of being pressed into conformity by government or by society. So I would like to appeal to people who, whether it's because of a conservative or libertarian instinct or a more progressive instinct, or I would say just an American belief that part of the point of living in a country like this is you don't have to conform to what other people demand of you, that we're not only on board with that, we're champions of that.
Yeah. That's good for Fox News. You should.
I'll go try it out there.
Let's I got to conform to the clock here, so go ahead.
Good evening. Thank you for your time today. This question is specifically for the Congresswoman. You've given us a lot of interesting perspectives, but at some point you sound more like a moderate Republican in ideology and verbiage. Can you clearly distinguish what makes you a Democrat, and do you think your policies and presentation reflect the core ethos of the party?
I think there's a really core thing you're pointing to here, which is like the goalposts and how they've moved and shifted over time, and like having something that is static, like believing in people's agency to run a small business, their authority, to put their dollars where they want to and not be a vassal state of a giant corporation. But to have, there's memes you see, right, of like support your local economy. Your local economy is Home Depot and Taco Bell. That's not the America that we're fighting for here. And I think there's also this thing of like verbiage and words, and it's like being able to lift open the hood on the idea and say like, does this have merit? Does this hold water? Who are you talking to? Why are you talking this way? And I remember when I just started running, and somebody just reminded me, I declared my candidacy for this office 3 years ago. So this is not something that I have like a real depth of the right verbiage, right? The right verbiage. But I was trying to practice a stump speech, and I had written it out myself, and I was telling it to my husband, and he was like, "What are you trying to say?" and I was like, told him, and he was like, "Okay, well, just say that. Like, just say it straight. Just like represent your own culture and your own community without trying to sound like someone else. Don't make your views acceptable because you're hedging them in some kind of vocabulary, but just say what you're thinking, and say it repeatedly and honestly around the same, whether you are at church, whether you are at the locker room, whether you are at work, like wherever it is, like be consistent in your belief and say it the same way." And so that's what I'm doing. And I guess if that makes me sound like a Republican, I mean, that's my family. And I would say judging it on the merit of my votes, on the merit of, standing up for small businesses, standing up for public schools, standing up for the necessity and urgency of American independence in the trades.
Yes.
Good afternoon. My name is Alex Fuentes. I'm a second year at the college, and I'm a Fellows Ambassador for Secretary Buttigieg, and also a resident Hispanic. But when we look at, I want to go on to the Congresswoman's point about $3 million in U.S. aid that would, for example, went into the production of a comic slip. At least in my experience, if $3 million wanted to be dedicated to small business, that money would have gone to small businesses, and whether or not that $3 million went to this comic strip has no effect on how support for small businesses is quantified. So I guess my question is, how does the Democratic Party manage that, for example, funding for a migrant hotel doesn't mean disinvesting in Black communities or in small businesses or in development of the economy?
Well, let's.
I'm trying to like. So you're saying like an either or. Yeah, you're pointing to like why is this an either or thing? Well, I think you resources are limited, right? There is a finite pie, and so thinking about where you're going to spend it to get the most use, and like when we think about funding public schools and having air conditioning in a rural school, like I would say that is doing a lot of the same work of supporting those same people going out and being able to have, the skills to run a budget, to start their own business. Like getting forced into different categories, like that's in many ways that is a choice to like say this benefits one group and this doesn't benefit the other group. But to say most directly where our values are and how that responds, like there was a lot of crazy stuff that, was in the USAID, but similarly, like a lot of our inspector generals were pointing to a lot of this stuff before, and Congress failed to act, and it drove me crazy. It drove me crazy that we weren't going after the fraud that was revealed in PPP, truly. And like, why? Why did we let that, like, why would they let that slip away, as opposed to saying we want to root out fraud, waste, and abuse wherever it is? I hope that's
Well, you could ask the inspectors general, but they were fired.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Cameron Landon. I'm a third year in the college studying political science and Spanish from Savannah, Georgia. During this past year, I had the opportunity to represent Georgia as a delegate to the Democratic National Convention, serve as an executive board member for the College Democrats of America, and run a Harris campaign office in Savannah, Georgia. On the campaign, my team and I experienced abuse and neglect from leadership, including being cussed out in front of volunteers, being denied from doing outreach to Savannah's African American community, and being barred from working with our local county party. My question to you is, how can we ensure our party has effective year-round leadership to organize across the country, and how can we revitalize the local institutions of the Democratic Party, especially our
All right, this has to go to the chairman of the Democratic Mayors Association.
Well, thanks for your activism in the campaign last year. I would say this. One, I think Chairman Martin has a good strategy of ensuring that we prioritize all of our states across the country in terms of a permanent organizing campaign. I think secondly, one of my biggest frustrations in the campaign last year was not many mayors were in a driver's seat in terms of helping the party message what was happening on the ground to connect with Black voters, Hispanic voters, and voters of color. And it's important that we don't forget that mayors and your members of council, your governors, your members of the state legislatures, they are closest to the problems, but also closest to the solutions. And if we continue to rely on the DNC and people that have been in Washington for 80 years to be the lead messenger for the party, we're never going to be successful. We have an amazing bench of Democratic candidates all across the country, from running on school boards to mayors to folks running for city council. We as a party have to do a better job of elevating those voices, not just during the election, but also year round.
I'm reminded of something that right on this campus I met in the 80s with Gary Hart, who was running for president, and he told me something that was the most important lesson anybody ever imparted to me. He said, just remember, Washington's always the last to get the news. And it was very smart. Yes? Okay, I should add, because I took more time than I should have, we have limited time, so make your questions as brief as you possibly can.
Sure, I'll try. Good evening. Thank you for speaking with us today. I am a fourth-year student at the college studying law, letters, and society. My question is this. So the night after the Democrats lost the election, Bernie Sanders posted that a Democratic Party who has abandoned the working class will find itself abandoned by the working class people. My question is, to what extent do we agree with Bernie's evaluation that the Democratic Party has abandoned the working class? And if you do agree, how should the Democratic Party rectify its course so that it can be again the party for the working class?
You spent a lot of time with Bernie Sanders. Why don't you answer that question?
Sure. So I don't think that's fair, because we did so much to make sure we were empowering working people. I'm not saying everything was I'm not denying there's unfinished business. As a matter of fact, there's enormous unfinished business to do right by working people in this country. But I think it's also the case, at least as far as anything I got to work on, that we were right to be the most pro-union administration that there has been in my lifetime. That we were right to invest not just in dollars, but in respect for working people. Another conversation we had with apprentices, one of the last visits I did as secretary, I went back to South Bend where I grew up, where I remembered the lean and hungry days of the building trades. And I went to an electrical workers apprenticeship group where they were bursting at the seams now, having the best year that they've had in my lifetime and then some. And by the way, in terms of the respect side of things, one of the students said, the apprentices said, he had told a story that's probably what a lot of liberal Democrats in Washington would expect to hear. He said, I started college, it just really wasn't for me, it wasn't going that well, I found my way to the trades. Kid sitting next to him says, I was the valedictorian of my high school, but I could tell that where I really was going to find purpose was in the trades. Another kid around the table says, after I finished my master's degree, I decided where I really wanted to be was in the trades. These are the kinds of things that, if we were having this conversation 5 or 10 years ago, it was, at least among well-intentioned policymakers I was hearing from in Washington, just not something people could picture. Now, where I think Bernie's right is that we need to do more, both in terms of our policy focus of delivering things like access to paid family leave and keeping an economic focus on who's being served and who's not being served. Picking the right fights, there's this moment where Democrats are figuring out, okay, what battles are we going to pick, right? We've got to pick our battles. And I think that's mostly right, that we can't fight everything everywhere all the time. But we got to fight some things hard. And that's why you look at things like the CFPB. This is going to sound like a fairly small thing, but I think it reveals a big thing.
Consumer Protection.
Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Congressional Republicans just introduced a law to increase overdraft fees that banks can charge ordinary people. After the CFPB did a lot of work to make sure that you couldn't charge, effectively 100% or more interest on these things anymore. You had to either be transparent about your fees or the fees were capped at $5. And congressional Republicans are trying to get rid of that with, as far as I can tell, the backing of the Trump administration. In fact, I know it's got the backing of the Trump administration because Russ Vought, I don't know how to say it. What I do know is that he was the head of Project 2020, he was deeply involved in Project 2025, and now he's the head of the budget. And if I could stitch this response back to Alex's question a moment ago and Marie's response, budgets are a zero-sum thing. And we're about to see a budget. And the House will debate the budget, and the president and congressional Republicans have to go on the record saying what will make the cut and what will not. How much is for tax cuts for the rich? How much is going to be cut out of things that working people count on? And how much are they willing to add to the deficit in order to deliver those tax cuts for the rich? And that's something that I would like to believe, everybody from the blue dog Democrats to maybe some sane Republicans, and definitely anybody on the party spectrum from me to Bernie, can get behind saying we're going to pick a big, big fight over, because that's when they have to put their cards on the table.
Right.
Yes.
So, good evening and thank you for being here. My name is Eduardo. I'm a first year. My question's about the former President Biden withdrawal from the race. So for months before the June 2024 debate, Biden's fitness to run was already being questioned. And after the debate, several Democrats, including Kamala Harris, Gavin Newsom, mentioned that he was indeed fit to run. And David Axelrod mentioned in his Twitter that the discussion of getting out of the ticket was largely irrelevant today. So my question is, what changed in the mindset of the party members from this short time span within around a month from the debate to his withdrawal? And looking back now, should prominent Democrats such as yourselves brought this issue up sooner and even in danger of falling the bad graces of the president?
Just since I was name checked.
Sorry.
I actually wrote an op-ed piece saying that and I had spoken out years before the election suggesting the president should think about whether it was appropriate to run at the age that he was. And I wrote a piece after the debate saying he should get out of the race. So I don't know exactly what you're referring to, but I just wanted to make that clear.
Yeah, I'm referring to an article of The Hill that mentions a Twitter you wrote on X on June 30th. This is The Hill coming up with it. I don't know if they're being...
I don't know. I'd have
Sorry,
to take a
I don't mean
look
no
at
disrespect.
my record. No, I'm not. I don't feel disrespected. I just,
Well,
I took a fair amount of guff for the things that I've said over the years about that. So
I'll apologize.
no, that's okay. No, that's fine. But I don't know if anybody wants to address that other than me clearing myself.
Yeah, that was wild. That was wild. I remember watching the beginning of that debate and being like, I'm going to bed, and going to the cloakroom and people were like crying the next day, and then the wagon started circling, and I think that was a real, and I think maybe what David was pointing out was that like people have already cast their ballots.
Yeah.
This is a problem, and I think the question that's maybe more useful at this point is like, how do we ensure that like the people that were loudest about protecting what was not clearly not a good idea, that those people don't have agency to make those kinds of decisions and to be steering the ship. Like you have to tell people, you have to be clear, you have to be candid with people about what's going on and about. It's crazy to be up here and be called like a young person, because I'm like only in Congress would I be called a young person. Like I'm 36, like I'm not young.
Well.
I'm 37, so. Seasoned millennials.
Yes.
Good evening. My name is Gil Rubenstein. I'm a first year in the college. Alexis de Tocqueville wrote in Democracy in America that, generally speaking, only simple conceptions can grip the mind of a nation. An idea that is clear and precise, even though false, will always have greater power in the world than an idea that is true but complex. For the past 10 years, Republicans have run on 4 words: make America great again. And now we are in a new golden age, apparently. I'm curious if each panelist can, in maybe a sentence, share what are the Democrats and what do we represent?
So for me, it's always been about freedom, security, and democracy. And by freedom, I mean not just freedom from overbearing government, but things government should do to secure your freedom from anybody else who can threaten your freedom, from a corporation to your neighbor. Security on everything from aviation safety, which I think we're all really concerned about right now, to national security, which we're all pretty concerned about right now, to democracy, but democracy in a rich sense of the term, not just the formalities of voting an election, but living in a society where people are empowered to know that the government works for us and not the other way around. That's what I think we're about. I could draw a line from those principles all the way down to what we think about the CFPB's overdraft rule, or some regulation that I worked on to hold airlines accountable or keep railroad workers safe. That to me, that's what we're about. And you're right, we do need to talk about it more frequently in those straightforward terms.
We're the party of party of justice. In terms of, we're celebrating Black History Month, and the Democratic Party continues to fight for passing the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. The party of opportunity, making sure that working class Americans have a fighting shot of achieving their version of the American dream. And the party of hope, the party of hope. When I think about the lies and the rhetoric out of our current president, it doesn't make me more hopeful as a country. And at every time I voted in an election, the Democratic Party has always been the party of hope, and I believe hope is the most powerful word we have in the English dictionary.
I think Mark Twain said, I would have wrote a shorter letter, but I didn't have enough time. Not to confuse simplicity with truth. It takes more time to say something true, clearly, maybe. But pay trades. Maybe that's 2 words. Pay trades. Pay people for what's worth having. Pay people for. You need to be able to raise a family and own a home with 1 income. You need to build something that's worth having, not just what you can get, but what you want. Clean rivers, clean soil, a strong natural resource economy, one that is predicated on respect for each other, regardless of whether or not they have the credential that we've decided they need to have. All of the ways that we convey disrespect for people who've decided to raise families instead, or who are choosing to build something with their hands, all of the forms of intelligence that you can have, not just academic intelligence, but all of it. We need a broadening of the definitions, not moving away from what we are holding to as a party, but broadening, what we view as respectable, who we view as worthy of having a seat at the table, who is capable of writing legislation. And just randomly, I recently found that it is basically functionally impossible to put drawings into legislative text. It all has to be in language. So it's designed by lawyers for lawyers. And that is one form of intelligence. You want to put a blueprint in congressional text, you can't do it. Functionally can't do it. Wow. There's just this massive disregard and disrespect of so many necessary tools to build a legislative process, to build a body that is reflective of the diversity and gifts of the American population.
Let me just say we're running out of time here, and I apologize to all of you who've lined up for questions. But two things I would say to your point, Marie. We had a pandemic, and when we had that pandemic, many of us in this room had the opportunity to sit at home in front of a computer and make a good living. And we celebrated those people who couldn't do that or decided not to do that because they had to go out and do the things that actually make this country go, to make things, to grow things, to ship things, to care for us, to protect us. And we call them essential workers. Yeah. But we don't treat them like essential workers when we're not in a pandemic. And we ought to think about that because their essentiality is still true. The other thing that we haven't touched on here, and you young people here have the brain power and the skills and the necessity to think about it, is so much of what's driving all of this change is the exponential pace of technological advancement and our ability to get our arms around the impacts of it in real time so that we can think about what is the interest of the larger community and protect the ability of people, whatever they're doing, to earn a living, to support their families, to have some prospects for their children. These are complex questions, and it's going to require a lot of our next leaders to advance policies that will give the largest number of people the best chance to live the lives that they want to live. So that responsibility is going to fall to all of you, and you are more equipped to deal with it because you've grown up with technological change as a fact of life. You know what the promise of it is, and you know probably a little more than those on this panel, even what the threats are, although we've certified that you're both quite young. But I got to finish up because Pete has to get home and go to bed. But this debate, this discussion is going to continue. It will evolve. It will be carried forward by leaders who will help define what the Democratic Party is, but also by what you demand of it. And so make sure that you're participating in that discussion and help shape it. And thank you for being here tonight.